searching for a better thing. Wanna replace me? I'm in a place that I've never been.
So guys, let's talk about the Weebill Lab. My name is Damien Cooper and welcome to Monkey Pixels. So Zhiyun sent us the new Weebill Lab and we were pretty excited about this one. And as you might have noticed, we recently switched from our 1DX to the EOS R to have a way smaller setup to go along with our cinema camera setup. And I'm not gonna lie, the announcement of the Weebill Lab was actually part of the decision to downsize from the 1DX to the EOS R, because that thing is so tiny and makes traveling with the DSLM way more comfortable than actually having to lug around a bigger one-handed gimbal. So as I said, Zhiyun sent us the gimbal, but we're not being paid for this. This is not a sponsored review, so this is our honest opinion on the gimbal. So as I've already mentioned, we were pretty excited when we received the gimbal. So we took our EOS R along with our 24mm 1.4L lens and of course the adapter ring because it's not a native lens, and we put it on top of the gimbal and we wanted to balance it, and we did not have any luck with it whatsoever. Okay, so why didn't it work? As I've said earlier, the EOS R is a DSLM and this gimbal is specifically designed for mirrorless cameras. But the EOS R is also one of the bigger cameras. And since we don't have any native lenses, we need to use the adapter ring that makes the whole setup a little bit more front heavy. So the 50mm as well as the 24mm are definitely our smallest lenses that we have, and even though they're rather lightweight compared to other L lenses or even zoom lenses, the entire setup was just too front heavy. So no matter how we tried, it just wasn't enough space for the tilt axis to go through, which were limiting our movement a lot, and going underslug just wasn't possible at all. So again, we were really disappointed, but we went online, we ordered some counterweights by Zhiyun directly, but then when we received them, there wasn't really any way to attach them to, and when we actually tried to attaching them, it still didn't really work. So that was really a bummer, and then we were really close to giving up. But this wouldn't be Monkey Pixels if we didn't really try hard to make this setup work. So what did we do? We actually dismounted the base plate and switched it around because it has this little bit of weight on top of it to actually hold the lenses. So this weight actually made up for it a little bit, so we could move the camera a little bit towards the front. And then we removed the eyepiece of the EOS R because that was the main reason why it was hitting the tilt axis. Unfortunately, for some reason, you can't really detach it easily like all of our other Canon DSLRs, and you have to unscrew 2 screws, and that really isn't a good workaround unless you just want to have it off. But since we're using it for a lot of photography, I really want to have it on. And I'm just telling you right now, screwing it and unscrewing it a lot of times just really isn't a good idea because it will destroy your screws. So again, not a happy workaround. But I went online and I saw that Small Rig is actually developing a base plate with attachments especially made for the Weebill Lab. So since we're way under the max payload of the gimbal, even like not even half of the payload, I'm pretty sure that if we have the right base plate with the counterweights, that we are even able to mount bigger cameras and bigger setups and have no problem using the gimbal the way it's intended to. But it only ships end of January, so for now this is more of an overview of what we have done so far, and there will be a part 2 as soon as we get the special base plate for counterweights as well. So make sure you subscribe, stay tuned, and maybe let us know in the comments below what we missed in this review so that we can incorporate that into the second review. But since we made the setup work and had full range of motion with a little bit of trickery, we did go ahead, shot some content with it. Usually we'd like to take a whole lot of time to actually review that thing, but since it took so long to actually make it work, we didn't really have the time. So Belle and I went for a workout, we went jogging and just working out in the park a little, and we decided to take the camera and just test it to its ability to actually be able to run with it and get some smooth shots with it. But without further ado, let's start the review. First things first, what am I looking for when buying a gimbal? And most of you are saying smooth footage, duh. but actually smooth footage isn't the #1 priority when I'm looking for a gimbal. And why do I say that? For 90% or even 95% of the time, we just shoot run and gun, we shoot YouTube content, or we want to be flexible with our content. So being able to actually carry all that setup around and having an easy setup time is our #1 priority. So #1 is definitely the size and the weight, and #2 priority is the ease of setup. Because if I have to take half an hour to balance my camera and calibrate some motors and some apps whenever I'm trying to switch lenses or going to another location, that really kills the vibe for me, and I would end up not using the gimbal most of the time. If we do have a bigger budget shoot that we're shooting on the C200 and maybe getting a separate suitcase that actually fits the gimbal and all that, that is 10 times the price, then that's totally fine, but this is reserved for the bigger budget shoots and not for our travel videos, YouTube videos, and run and gun style mini videos. And then #3 obviously is smooth footage. And I'm saying that of course it needs to produce somewhat smooth footage, but I'm saying that most of the time if you have some micro jitters and it doesn't really look like it's shot on a slider, but you can actually make up for that when you're shooting in slow motion or using a warp stabilizer in post, then that is totally fine by me, because we're rarely shooting something that is only one take in 24 frames that can be redone or re-edited. So again, smooth footage isn't our #1 priority. And #4 on our list is fancy features and other things. And I mean by that is that you can control your gimbal via app, that you have like a time-lapse moving feature, or that you have some digital follow focus or some stuff like that, because we rarely use that at all. We keep it really simple with our gimbal setups, and we just want to have a quick and easy setup, smooth forward, left and right shots, and that's pretty much it. So let's start with the things that I really like about the gimbal. I already mentioned it, and that is size and weight. This thing is really tiny, and it can be easily attached to any kind of small backpack, or it even fits into the bag. And having it in one hand with the EOS R is so lightweight. You can run with it, you can jog with it, you can just use selfie mode to actually vlog with it, because it's really not that big, it's not a big of a deal. And we would have loved to have it in Abu Dhabi back in December when we were shooting for Etihad Airways, because that setup is so small that most people don't even bat an eye. Unless you're going with a big gimbal and a C200 on it, then everybody's looking. But with that kind of small setup, you're actually good in most places. Next thing I really like is the new design, and as well as the Crane 3, from what I've seen on pictures, as well as the Weebill Lab, has a complete redesign that actually looks differently. It doesn't only have one pole, but it also has the ability to attach a tripod on top so that you can actually hold it with two hands and easily, without any problem, go into underslug mode, which is probably the biggest plus side of this gimbal. Because with other gimbals, you always have to do this kind of weird movement, and then when the camera is too big, it doesn't work. And with this, I actually use the tripod on top of the gimbal 90% of the time, because it works fine in regular mode and you can easily go into underslug mode. Speaking of the tripod attachment and detachment, what I really liked about it, because when I first saw this online and I saw that you have to unscrew it and then screw it on top again, I was like, oh, that's the setup time. It just takes forever all the time. But Zhiyun actually sent us these quick release plates for the tripod, which makes it so easy and so quick to switch from having the tripod under your gimbal to on top of your gimbal. So that I really liked. And if they don't come with your gimbal when you purchase it, you definitely need to have them purchased separately, because they're definitely worth whatever they're costing. One more thing about the design, and most people already talked about that, is the ability to lock your axes. And why do I love this so much? Because we always have the gimbal attached to our backpack, and we usually need to have some kind of cable ties to actually hold everything in place so that it's not wobbly. And then whenever you need to dismount it from your backpack, you already need to tangle with the cable ties. And with this, you can just lock everything in place, attach it to your backpack, and you're good with it. The next thing is that it makes balancing your camera so much easier and so much quicker, because you can always lock away all the other axes that you're not balancing at the moment, and when this axis is balanced, you just lock it and then move on to the next one. So that is a feature that I think every gimbal should have. One thing I also really like about the new gimbal is that you have this trigger button in the front. So pressing it once, you actually activate your follow mode, but I'm going to say something about that later. Pressing it twice, it locks back into center mode, and that is one thing that I really like, because I'm using the follow mode a lot of the times, and then I want to have my camera back in center position. And with other gimbals, you either have to start a guessing game or you have to switch off and on your gimbal to actually have your camera centered again. Pressing the button 3 times, you revert to selfie mode, which I don't know if I'll be using this a lot, but since the setup is so small, I could actually see people vlogging with that setup. Let's look at more good things so I do not forget anything. Speaking of easy setup time, as I mentioned already, that on our number 2 priority list is an easy setup time. So what we did on the field is we switched the 24mm to the 50mm, and it literally took less than a minute to detach one lens, attach the other lens, and then rebalance the gimbal. So with all the other axes locked in place, we only had to move the plate a little bit towards the front, and that's it. Rebalanced, everything worked fine, and we were totally happy with it. So that is definitely a big plus point, especially when you want to have a 50mm lens on a gimbal, because it gives you some more unique shots than the wide angle lens that you're usually using. Next thing up on our list is the underslug mode. I'll be honest with you, because most of the times with all our other gimbals, we didn't really have the option to use the underslug mode because our cameras were always too big or the gimbal just didn't have that feature at all. And with that, we actually were able to go really low to the ground. I even started running with it. And one thing that I really like about it, which is totally underrated, is that even when you're not shooting and you're just moving from one location to the other, you can just hold the gimbal like a small suitcase or a handbag or whatever, which makes it so much more convenient to actually walk around with it, because with other one-handed gimbals you always have to have them awkwardly attached to your body, because there's no real good way to actually carry this camera around that isn't really straining on your muscles more than it already is. So let's come to the features that I'm not really that much looking forward to, but when they're already there, I'm not complaining either. And that is the POV mode as well as the vortex mode. I think we won't use it too much, but when you actually use it, it's so cool to have. And I can remember a couple shoots back where we wanted to have something like a vortex mode where the camera spins in 360 degrees, but our gimbal didn't allow that, and that feature is really cool. Just don't overuse it, but when you actually have something that advances your story or it actually makes sense for a cool transition, then this is a really cool feature to have. As well as the POV mode, I probably wouldn't use it most of the times, but when you actually want to do like a tilt over, where you want to mimic a POV, which the mode is actually called, where you lean over to the left or your right of your character, then that is also a really cool feature to have. And let's lastly talk about the footage, because we kept running with it and we were really sprinting full on with the gimbal, and the footage still looked smooth. We even went up some stairs, and even there wasn't any wobbling with a 24mm attached, and as far as I can tell from our first time using it, the footage was really smooth, and that is definitely a plus. But all good things have to come to an end, so here are the things I didn't really like about the gimbal. And let's start off with one thing that I'm a little bit on the fence about, and that is the missing follow mode. Because most of the times I'm using a full follow mode, meaning that the gimbal is mimicking my movement from the up and down movements as well as the front and back movements. Most of the time I'm using this to actually do a reveal shot when I'm coming from up or down and reveal into my scene and then keep going. The Weebill Lab doesn't really have a dedicated follow mode anymore, but it has the front trigger button, and when you hold it, you automatically switch into follow mode, and when you release it, you're already in pan follow mode again. The thing about that is, as soon as you release it, the gimbal just locks in place to its center position, so you can't really get a smooth transition from follow mode into pan follow mode, but then again, you couldn't do that with other gimbals either, so that is not really a big point. I think I would love to have a dedicated follow mode so I don't have to press the trigger all the time, but again, this is just a minor thing. So let's start off with the footage again, because we were doing one test where I actually used the camera in the underslug mode, trying to go really low to the ground and running sideways at full speed to actually get a grasp of Belle's feet running. And there the camera just couldn't keep up, because as soon as I started running and the wind pressure actually tilted the camera a little. I honestly didn't mind it that much because it gave it a little bit more of a rush feeling and mimicked speed a little. But if you really want to have a level horizon and want to run sideways, then this doesn't work. I'm not sure if that really works with other gimbals other than the really big ones that we used in the past, but keep that in mind. Running sideways at full speed, the horizon doesn't stay level. Since it's really cold in Vienna right now, we were using the gimbal with gloves most of the time. And using it in the underslug mode, I actually 2 or 3 times hit the axis button to lock the axis while shooting because my glove actually hit the button. The thing is, usually I won't use gloves, but I also don't really have that big hands. So if you're one with really big hands, that might actually become an issue because there's not enough space between the tripod and the buttons or the axes when using it in underslug mode. So that might become a problem for some people. Speaking of buttons, the other thing is when using it in both hands, one up top, one down below, I accidentally pressed some buttons some of the time, so I started to tilt the camera, or sometimes I went into the menu functions of the gimbal, which I didn't really like either because I couldn't find a way to actually have these buttons locked away so that whenever I press them that didn't do anything. I mean, most of the times it wasn't really that bad and you probably have to adjust. Maybe it was a problem of me wearing gloves too. But keep that in mind that if you're using the tripod on top, but you also want to utilize the bottom handle, you might actually press the buttons on accident. Okay, one more thing, and again, this is not a big deal for us because we don't really want to use it anyway, is the phone transmission that a lot of people talked about because it didn't really work for us. It was a pain to set up because you have to go into the gimbal's Wi-Fi, you have to connect to it, and then it took a while to actually make the connection. And then while using it, the transmission definitely wasn't fast enough to actually use it as an external monitor. One thing that is really cool is that you can use your phone to actually change all the parameters. The fuck, where did that come from? All right, better. So one thing that is really cool about the app is that you can actually change your values of your camera, like shutter speed, aperture, as well as ISO. So that is really cool that you can actually change this from your phone. Again, it's not really fast enough for an external monitor, but that option is kind of cool. One thing to notice as well is that our Weebill came with a follow focus, and I heard really great things about it, but since we're using Canon cameras and they have the dual pixel autofocus, we don't really use them, especially on a smaller gimbal like that. If you have a bigger gimbal and you have a first AD, then of course a follow focus is a really cool thing, but I think this setup is definitely designed for run and gun, and I don't really want to attach more stuff to it. So we won't be reviewing this, and you might look somewhere else for the follow focus. So what's our verdict on the Weebill Lab so far after testing it a little bit? Obviously, the thing that our camera didn't really fit on top of it without some tangling and some hacking was a big disappointment, but I will put a pin into that and we'll look for the other base plate in the future, and then all these problems might actually be completely neglected. And other than that, I think it's the perfect gimbal for a small run and gun setup because it's really tiny, it has some cool functions, it worked very well, and the new design with the tripod up top to go into underslug mode was really cool, and I hope for all gimbals in the future to incorporate a similar design because I think Zhiyun really nailed it with that one. So if you have a Sony a7 something and a native lens that isn't too big, this is definitely the gimbal for you, especially at this price. But if you're rocking a bigger setup like a GH5 with an 18-35 or an Eos R with an adapter ring and some other L lenses, then you might want to hold off to our second review when we get the base plate with the counterweights. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and make sure to actually leave a comment what we missed in this review and what are you curious about when we're doing the second part, and then I'll see you on the next one.